Imagine a lush, almost impossible paradise. A towering green mountain just sort of rising up from the parched earth of ancient Mesopotamia. Picture these verdant terraces cascading with exotic plants, vibrant flowers, fruit trees everywhere, all somehow sustained by some, well, unseen, maybe miraculous force. That's the image, right? The enduring picture of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the legendary seven wonders of the ancient world. But here's the thing, the real enigma that's haunted historians, archaeologists for centuries. How can something so famous, so universally known, just be so incredibly elusive? I mean, unlike the pyramids, you can still go see those, or even the rubble of the Colossus of Rhodes. The Hanging Gardens seem to have left, well, virtually no discernible trace. It's like a phantom of history, a really magnificent whisper from the past that just defies any concrete proof. Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. Our mission today is to really go on a deep dive into the true story of this captivating wonder.
We've got a stack of fascinating sources here, classical Greek and Roman accounts, meticulous archaeological finds, some groundbreaking new research, and honestly, it promises to challenge pretty much everything you thought you knew about the Hanging Gardens.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to try and move beyond, the popular imagination, the romantic legends that have really shaped how we see them. What's truly fascinating here, I think, is how a powerful story, a cultural narrative, can both preserve a kind of kernel of historical reality, but at the same time, and often quite dramatically, distort its fundamental truths. We're going to sift through the evidence, look at what we actually know about this lost wonder.
And you should prepare yourself. Because the truth, well, as revealed by these sources, it's actually far more intriguing than the legend. The Hanging Gardens were real, yes, but it seems their story is almost entirely wrong. The actual location, the true builder, might genuinely surprise you. Get ready for some serious insights that could really reframe a whole chapter of ancient history. The enduring legend, an earthly paradise misplaced. So let's start where most people's imagination probably goes first.
Yeah.
That classical vision of the gardens. Just picture it. A towering green paradise right in the middle of the dust and, the intense heat of ancient Mesopotamia. It honestly sounds like something conjured from a fantasy novel, doesn't it?
It really does. And that popular conception passed down through Greek and Roman writers, it paints exactly that picture. A man-made mountain, lush vegetation, an impossible green oasis maybe rising, 75, 80 feet high from the hot, arid landscape of ancient Babylon.
Just incredible.
It was conceived as more than just a garden. It was a vision of an earthly paradise, a cool, living marvel in this sun-scorched plain. And it absolutely captured the classical imagination. So grand, so awe-inspiring that it just had to be true, right? Which is how it ended up on that exclusive list, the Seven Wonders of the Ancient World.
But you mentioned it's based on secondhand accounts.
That's vital to remember. This captivating image, it was largely built on reports from people who never saw it. The Greek and Roman writers who described it, people like Diodorus Siculus, Strabo, Quintus Curtius Rufus, they weren't writing when the gardens were supposedly built in the 6th century BC. They weren't eyewitnesses.
They wrote centuries later.
Exactly. Centuries later. Their stories were often based on earlier texts, which are now lost, from Hellenistic historians. And as those stories got copied, translated, passed down, well, you inevitably get embellishment, misinterpretation, maybe just plain historical confusion. It shows how easily even grand historical truths can get blurred over time.
And speaking of getting blurred, even the name Hanging Gardens, that's not quite right either, is it? When we hear hanging, we think suspended, dangling.
Yeah, exactly. Images of ropes defying gravity. But that's a crucial misunderstanding. The Greek word kremastos, or the Latin pensilis, they don't actually mean suspended by ropes like we imagine. It's more like overhanging.
Overhanging, like a balcony?
Precisely, like a balcony or a terrace or maybe an artificial hill built up. This subtle difference completely reframes the picture. It shifts it from some magical floating garden to a masterpiece of architectural engineering. Immense, yes, but fundamentally grounded. Think more like a ziggurat maybe, with projecting tiers of plants.
Supported by columns or walls underneath.
Right. Philo of Byzantium, he was an engineer. He seems to have gotten this. He described plants cultivated above ground level, with tree roots in an upper terrace, not the earth. And he said the whole thing was supported on stone columns. That paints a picture of a supported, tiered structure, definitely not something magically suspended.
Wow. It's amazing how one word, lost in translation, can just completely change how we visualize something so famous. And then, of course, there's the story everyone loves, the romantic one, King Nebuchadnezzar II ruling Babylon back in 605 to 562 BC.
That's the one.
The story says he built this incredible wonder for his wife, Queen Amytis, because she was homesick for her green homeland, Media. It's the perfect Hollywood story, isn't it? A king's grand gesture of love. Who wouldn't want that to be true?
It is a very compelling narrative, no doubt, and that explains why it stuck around in popular culture. The story goes, Amytis, a princess from mountainous green Media that's like modern northwestern Iran, she missed the hills and valleys amidst Babylon's flat, arid plains.
So Nebuchadnezzar builds her an artificial mountain.
Supposedly. To console her, he commanded this artificial mountain, a tiered paradise, meticulously designed to mimic the landscape she missed. It gives a very human reason for such a massive project. But as we dig into the sources, the historical evidence for this specific story gets remarkably shaky.
And that shakiness shows up pretty quickly when you look at the actual classical sources, right? They don't all agree. You said our knowledge comes only from these Greek and Roman writers, none of them eyewitnesses.
Exactly. It's less like a precise historical record and more like a game of historical telephone played over centuries with, frankly, incomplete information.
So who says what?
Well, Aperosis. He was a Babylonian priest, writing around 290 BC. He's the only original source for the Nebuchadnezzar and Amytis story. His own work is lost, but parts are preserved by later writers like Josephus. Berosus specifically mentions Nebuchadnezzar building stone terraces like hills, planting trees for his Median wife. That's the cornerstone of the legend.
Okay, so one source pins it on Nebuchadnezzar, but then no.
But then you have Diodorus Siculus, a Greek historian writing much later, around 6030 BC. He gives a very detailed architectural description, 400 feet square, 80 feet high, thick walls, waterproofing. But crucially, he says it was built by a Syrian king for a Persian concubine. Not Nebuchadnezzar, not a Median queen.
Wait, a Syrian king? That's a huge difference already.
It is, and it's significant. Greeks often use Syrian broadly for people from Mesopotamia, including Assyrians. Diodorus likely got his info from even earlier lost histories, like those by Ctesias or Clitarchus. Then there's Strabo, the geographer, writing around the time of Christ. He mentions arched vaults, cube-like foundations, and adds that key detail about screws used to lift water from the Euphrates.
Screws. We'll have to come back to that.
Definitely. His source might have been someone who traveled with Alexander the Great. And then Quintus Curtius Rufus, a Roman historian in the 1st century AD, also says a Syrian king built it for a homesick queen, probably using similar sources to Diodorus. And Philo, the engineer, focuses on the technical bits, trees on terraces, stone supports, raised water sources.
It sounds like everyone heard part of a big story and maybe filled in the gaps differently. Or they were just working from different original accounts.
That's a very good way to put it. And to make it even messier, sometimes the gardens were even attributed to the legendary Assyrian queen Semiramis, though Diodorus himself says that's wrong. If you step back and look at the big picture, the inconsistencies within the classical tradition itself, that's our first major clue that the story we all know is flawed.
They can't agree on the builder, the reason, the queen's nationality?
Not at all. It's not stable historical memory. It feels more like the preservation of a powerful core idea, this amazing terraced garden somewhere in Mesopotamia, and over centuries, different conflicting origin stories got attached to it. That romantic Nebuchadnezzar Amytis story, it starts to look less like history and more like a literary trope, a common storytelling device to give a relatable motive for something huge and extravagant.
So what does this all mean? Basically, the stories we have are like that game of telephone across centuries. Lots of different details, lots of contradictions. It makes you really question the whole Gardens of Babylon premise right from the start. 2, the Babylonian problem. A wonder without a trace. Okay, so we've got issues within the classical stories themselves. But now we hit an even bigger problem, maybe the most damning one. The complete lack of evidence in Babylon itself. It's like the wonder the Greeks described as just a ghost in its own supposed home.
It really is. And maybe the strongest argument against a Babylonian location is the utter silence in contemporary Babylonian sources. The Neo-Babylonian Empire, especially under Nebuchadnezzar II, was incredibly literate. They kept meticulous records.
Nebuchadnezzar himself was a huge builder, right? And he liked to brag about it.
Immensely prolific on both counts. He left behind a vast amount of cuneiform inscriptions on clay cylinders, bricks, stone slabs, documenting almost everything he built. He boasts at great length about rebuilding the great Ziggurat et Menanche, fortifying Babylon with massive walls, paving the processional way, building grand palaces and temples like the famous Ishtar Gate. He details the materials, the divine favor.
So a king who wrote down everything, a meticulous record keeper.
Exactly. Yet in this mountain of text, not one single mention of building a great terraced garden, not a whisper about a wonder for all peoples on this scale. It's just inconceivable. A project this big, this expensive, this innovative, it would have been a crowning achievement. He absolutely would have boasted about it. The silence is deafening.
And what about the queen, Amytis?
Also, completely absent from contemporary Babylonian records. Now, a political marriage to a Median princess, that's plausible for a king like Nebuchadnezzar. But her total absence, alongside the absence of the gardens she supposedly inspired, it strains belief. This isn't just a lack of proof. It feels like powerful negative evidence.
So the texts are silent. What about the ground? The archaeology? Imagine them digging for decades, finding gates, palaces, but no gardens.
That's pretty much it. Over a century of intensive digging at Babylon, especially by the Germans like Robert Coldway, has failed to turn up any definitive physical remains of the Hanging Gardens. A structure like the one described, massive vaults, deep foundations for big trees, complex waterproofing, it would leave a huge, unmistakable archaeological footprint. And that footprint just hasn't been found in a way that matches the descriptions.
But didn't Coldway claim he found it? That must have been a big deal back then.
Oh, it was huge. Coldway, excavating from 1899 to 1917, did propose he'd found it. He found this weird building with 14 vaulted rooms and an unusual well in the northeast corner of the southern palace, but his theory is now almost universally rejected.
Why? What was wrong with it?
Well, first, the location is pretty far from the Euphrates River. The classical accounts specifically say the gardens were on or very near the river for irrigation. Coldway's site doesn't fit that. Second, those small, dark, vaulted rooms, they look much more like administrative offices or maybe cool storage cellars for grain or oil, not substructures strong enough to hold massive trees and tons of irrigated soil. No sign of the necessary waterproofing either.
So definitely not the base for a huge watered garden.
Not really, no. And other ideas have been floated and dismissed too. Some thought maybe the Great Ziggurat, the Tower of Babel, was the inspiration, but ziggurats were bare temple towers, not gardens. Maybe Nebuchadnezzar's outer palace. It's big enough, but poorly preserved, no proof. And the idea that the ruins are under the modern river, pure speculation, impossible to check right now.
Okay, so no texts, no ruins.
Yep.
And then there's Herodotus, the father of history. He actually went to Babylon, right? Surely you would have noticed a wonder of the world.
You'd absolutely think so, and that's why his silence is so significant. Herodotus visited Babylon probably around 450 BC. If Nebuchadnezzar built the gardens, they'd be less than a century old then, probably still magnificent.
And he wrote about Babylon.
Oh, yes. In his histories, he describes Babylon in detail, the huge walls, the processional way, the river irrigation systems. He was fascinated by grand sights, or themata as the Greeks called them, wonders, yet absolutely zero mention of any massive terraced garden. It's baffling. Yes, he also missed the Sphinx at Giza, oddly enough, but to completely omit what would have been Babylon's most unique feature, highly suspicious. And he's not alone. Other writers like Xenophon describe Babylon too, also without mentioning the gardens. If multiple keen observers missed it, it strongly suggests it just wasn't there to be seen. So if you connect all this, the silence in Babylonian texts, the silence from outside observers like Herodotus, the archaeological void, it creates this almost insurmountable problem for the traditional story. It's not just lack of proof, it's consistent negative evidence. A project this big would leave traces, texts, ruins, their complete absence from a well-documented king in a well-dug city. It forces us to shift the question. It's not where in Babylon were the gardens anymore. It's were the gardens ever in Babylon at all? 3. The Nineveh solution. A new paradigm for a lost wonder.
Okay, so after basically taking apart the traditional Babylon theory piece by piece, where does that leave us? Either the whole thing was a myth, just a cool story, or maybe the story was right about the garden, but wrong about the place. And this is where it gets really interesting. What if we've just been looking completely the wrong city? What if the legend isn't a myth, but a mislocation? This is where Dr. Stephanie Dalley's work comes in, and it's genuinely paradigm shifting.
It really is. The main proponent of this alternative, the Nineveh theory, is Dr. Stephanie Dalley. She's a brilliant Assyriologist at Oxford, an expert in ancient Mesopotamian languages. After nearly 20 years of incredibly detailed research, retranslating cuneiform, re-examining old archaeological reports, looking closely at palace reliefs, she published her big thesis in 2013 in her book, The Mystery of the Hanging Garden of Babylon.
And her argument is?
Elegant and powerful. The Hanging Gardens were real, absolutely magnificent, in fact. But they weren't in Babylon. They were built about a century earlier, around 700 BC, by the formidable Assyrian king Sennacherib. And they were built for his palace in Nineveh, about 300 miles north of Babylon.
Nineveh. not
Yeah.
Babylon. And the evidence from Assyria itself, you said it's the opposite of the silence in Babylon.
Completely the opposite. It's an explosion of information. While Nebuchadnezzar's records are silent on gardens, Sennacherib's royal inscriptions are full of detailed descriptions of his palace and garden complex at Nineveh. On his clay prisms, where he recorded his achievements, he calls his palace the palace without rival. And crucially, he boasts about creating an adjacent high garden that he explicitly calls a wonder for all peoples.
A wonder for all peoples. That sounds incredibly close to Wonder of the World.
Doesn't it? It's an uncanny parallel. And his descriptions match many elements of the classical legend. He talks about building a park in imitation of the Amanus Mountains, that's a forested range in modern Turkey, and planting it with all kinds of aromatic plants, orchard fruit trees, from mountain regions, and even from Chaldea, which is southern Mesopotamia, Babylon's region. So here you have an Assyrian king saying he built an artificial mountain, filled it with exotic plants as a display of power. It provides the builder and the motive missing from Babylon. It's a stunning reversal of that evidentiary silence.
So it's not just his own words. You said there are pictures and actual infrastructure. It's like finding the owner's manual and the wreckage of a mythical beast everyone thought was fake.
That is a perfect analogy. The archaeological and visual evidence at Nineveh is incredibly compelling. We have these magnificent carved stone panels, reliefs from the Assyrian palaces, one from Sennacherib's palace, and even more clearly one from his grandson Ashurbanipal's palace, actually depict the garden. They show this lush wooded landscape on a terraced hill, clearly being watered by an aqueduct.
You can actually see an aqueduct feeding the garden.
Yes, and there's a drawing of a now lost relief that's even more specific. It shows trees growing right on top of a roofed, colonnaded walkway. That is a stunning visual match for the hanging or overhanging structure that classical writers like for Babylon. These weren't just decorations, they were likely architectural depictions.
See, pictures are amazing. What about the water? That was always the big question for Babylon, too. How do you water something that high?
And this is where Sennacherib's engineering genius really comes in. Such a garden needed a massive, reliable water supply, delivered high up. Archaeological surveys, helped enormously by old spy satellite images, have uncovered Sennacherib's vast water management system. We're talking about an 80-kilometer, that's 50 miles, network of canals, dams, aqueducts, all designed to bring water from mountains far away, the Gomel River, down to Nineveh.
50 miles of canals. Just for a garden.
For the city and the garden, yes. And the crown jewel was the Jerwan Aqueduct, an absolute marvel, built of over 2 million dressed stones, using arches and waterproof cement to cross a wide valley, literally a river in the sky. And there's an inscription right on it. Sennacherib, king of the world, over a great distance I had a watercourse directed to the environs of Nineveh. No ambiguity there. This system provided the huge amount of high-elevation water essential for that kind of terraced garden.
Okay, the evidence for Nineveh seems incredibly strong. Texts, pictures, the actual canals and aqueduct. But still, why did everyone call it the Hanging Gardens of Babylon? How does that mistake happen?
This is maybe Dr. Daly's most brilliant insight, tying it all together. It comes down to the complex history and politics of Mesopotamia. Remember, in 689 BC, Sennacherib destroyed Babylon brutally, flooded the ruins. Then he started this massive building program to make Nineveh the undisputed center of the world.
Trying to replace Babylon.
Exactly. And as part of that, he did something really deliberate and symbolic. He renamed the city gates of Nineveh using the exact same names as the famous gates of Babylon. It strongly suggests the strategy to make Nineveh a new Babylon. The name Babylon itself, Babinai, meant Gate of the Gods. And it was a prestigious title, sometimes applied to other major cities, too.
So Babylon could refer to more than one place, or at least Nineveh was trying to be a new Babylon.
Precisely. Now, fast forward centuries later, Alexander the Great's army marches through. His soldiers and historians are the source for many of those later Greek accounts. They wouldn't have known all these ancient political nuances and name games. And crucially, Alexander's army actually camped for 4 days right near the Jerwan Aqueduct on their way to a major battle in 331 BC.
So they saw the massive aqueduct watering a huge garden.
They would have had plenty of time to see it. An enormous aqueduct watering a magnificent garden near a great city that, because of Sennacherib's actions centuries earlier, was known, at least in some contexts, as a Babylon. Over time, as memory faded, got simplified through retelling. The famous garden got conflated with the more famous city called Babylon, the one down south on the Euphrates. The core memory of Great Garden near a city called Babylon survived, but the specific location got mixed up.
It's like the New York Big Apple thing. People, centuries later, thinking the orchards were in Manhattan, not upstate. The name stuck, the geography got scrambled.
That's a perfect analogy. The evidence for Nineveh textual, archaeological, visual, it all fits together. It matches the descriptions of the Hanging Gardens, and it provides a really plausible reason for the name confusion. Suddenly, all those contradictions we saw earlier, they just dissolve if you shift the location. 4. Engineering an earthly paradise.
All right, so now we know where this incredible wonder likely was Nineveh, not Babylon. Let's dig into how it was even possible back then. Sennacherib's garden wasn't just about planting things. It was a massive feat of ancient engineering. Those classical descriptions, maybe not so fantastical after all.
Exactly. Once you place it in Nineveh with Sennacherib's known engineering prowess, the classical accounts start to look remarkably accurate, if indirect, descriptions of some very sophisticated technology. The garden really was a showcase of Assyrian mastery over construction, hydraulics, irrigation on a scale that was probably unprecedented.
So how did they build the structure itself? The classical writers mentioned vaults and pillars.
Right. Both Diodorus and Strabo talk about massive arched vaults or strong stone pillars supporting the ascending terraces. These weren't just supports. They created spaces underneath galleries, maybe royal lodges lit by the overhanging terraces. The main challenge was supporting the immense weight of all that soil, depth enough for the roots of big trees. That needed exceptionally strong foundations and walls. Diodorus claimed the walls were 22 feet thick.
22 feet thick, that's incredible. But the water, constantly watering plants on upper levels, wouldn't leaks have been a total nightmare? Seems like the biggest risk.
Absolutely. That was probably the greatest structural challenge. Stopping leaks. Constant water seepage would weaken the mortar, the bricks, eventually cause a collapse. So they devised this really sophisticated multi-layer waterproofing system. Diodorus gives us great detail here. On top of the stone beams supporting the terraces, they put down a thick layer of reeds mixed in bitumen, that's natural asphalt, a sealant.
Okay, bitumen first.
Then 2 layers of baked brick, bonded with cement or gypsum mortar. And then the final crucial layer, sheets of lead, hammered and joined to create an impenetrable lining. That combination, especially the lead lining, shows an incredibly advanced understanding of waterproofing for the time. It was absolutely essential for the garden's long-term survival. It really highlights the ingenuity of those ancient engineers.
Okay, waterproofing sorted. But the biggest how question is still getting the water up there. Simple methods like shade oofs or bucket brigades wouldn't cut it for that volume, right? And this is where Strabo mentioned those screws. Cochleus.
Yes, and for centuries that was a huge puzzle, a seeming anachronism. Because the water-raising screw, the invention was always credited to Archimedes, the Greek genius who lived much later, around the 3rd century BC.
Right, centuries after Sennacherib.
Exactly. So Strabo describing screws being used in the 7th century BC seemed impossible. It cast doubt on all the classical sources, fueled the idea it was all myth. It was a real sticking point for historians of technology.
But this is where the story takes another amazing turn, right? Like finding out if Ava's invention wasn't invented by who we thought.
Precisely. This is one of the most exciting parts of Dr. Dali's research. Her retranslation of Sennacherib's own cuneiform inscriptions from Nineveh. She found this absolutely revolutionary passage. Sennacherib boasts about developing a new bronze casting technique, and he explicitly says he used it to create massive cylinders and screws of copper, or more accurately, large copper helicoids, alamitu, and he set them up over cisterns in his garden in order to draw water up all day long.
Wow, he actually wrote that down, using screws to lift water.
He did. It's the technological smoking gun. Unambiguous first-hand textual proof that the Assyrians, under Sennacherib, invented and used the water-raising screw 350 years before Archimedes. The device just got named after Archimedes later, maybe because he explained the principles so well or improved it, but the Assyrians had it first. This resolves the anachronism in Strabo perfectly and proves they had the exact advanced tech needed for the Hanging Gardens.
So the garden wasn't just botanical, it was showcasing this brand new invention.
It likely was. But even water screws need a water source to draw from, especially if the garden was on high ground near the palace. How did Sennacherib get the water to the screws?
Ah, right. But canals.
Exactly. Lifting water directly from the Tigris River at Nineveh all the way up would have been incredibly difficult. Sennacherib's solution was even bolder. Bring the water source to the garden, that massive system of canals and aqueducts we talked about. It tapped rivers way up in the mountains and used gravity to channel water down to the higher ground near Nineveh.
And the Druon aqueduct was key.
The Jerwan Aqueduct was the spectacular final piece, a river in the sky carrying water across a valley to feed huge reservoirs near the palace. From those elevated reservoirs, the bronze water screws did the final lift, raising water to the garden terraces. It was this whole integrated system: canals, aqueducts, screws, truly groundbreaking urban planning and environmental control for its time. The garden simply couldn't exist without it. The Mesopotamian royal garden, a symbol of power and plenty.
Okay, so beyond the mind-blowing engineering, what was the deeper meaning here? Why build such an extravagant thing? Surely it was more than just a pretty park for Sennacherib.
Oh, absolutely. To really get why a king would undertake something this huge, you have to look at the cultural and political meaning of a royal garden in the ancient Near East. The Hanging Gardens, or rather Sennacherib's garden at Nineveh, wasn't just about botany or romance. It was a powerful, calculated symbol of imperial might, a kind of microcosm of the cosmos with the king at the center, and basically a living, breathing piece of state propaganda.
Propaganda. How so? Like showing off his wealth?
Wealth, yes, but much more.
Huh.
Think about the plants themselves. It would have been this stunning display of botanical diversity, plants gathered from all over the vast Assyrian Empire, maybe even beyond.
So not just local stuff.
Definitely not just local. You'd have Mesopotamian staples, sure, date palms, tamarisk, figs, grapes, pomegranates, vegetables. But what made it a wonder was the exotic stuff. Sennacherib himself wrote about gathering and planting trees and aromatic plants from the mountains and foreign lands, valuable timber like cedar, cypress, juniper, boxwood, things not native to Assyria.
So each foreign tree was like a trophy.
Exactly. A living trophy, a tangible display of the empire's reach, proof that the king could command resources from anywhere. The garden literally became a botanical map of the empire. It showed that all conquered lands paid tribute, their resources were his.
Wow. Strolling through that garden, seeing plants from everywhere thriving together. It wasn't just beautiful, it was a living map of his conquests, a really subtle but powerful message.
Very subtle, very powerful. And in Mesopotamian thought, the royal garden itself was deeply symbolic. Often called an earthly paradise, paradisos, a Persian word for an enclosed park. It reflected the king's sacred role, his job as steward of divine order. Creating this lush, orderly, fertile space in a harsh land was a metaphor for the king taming nature, bringing stability and prosperity. Making the desert bloom showed his divine favor, his fitness to rule.
So it's like a mini version of his empire, all orderly and under his control.
Precisely. Gathering diverse plants, making them grow harmoniously, it projected this image of a unified, submissive empire flourishing under his command. Power and divine blessing, all in one green package.
And there's that one famous relief from his grandson Ashurbanipal's palace.
Yeah.
That shows this ideology in a really stark, almost chilling way.
Ah, yes, the famous banquet scene. It's in the British Museum now. It shows Ashurbanipal and his queen relaxing on couches, feasting in this idyllic garden setting. Musicians, attendants, grapevines, date palms. Perfect peace and luxury.
Sounds lovely. But there's a catch.
There's a very gruesome catch. If you look closely, hanging from a pine tree on the left, amidst all the beauty, is the severed head of Tumen, the defeated king of Elam.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's dark.
It is. And that juxtaposition, beauty and brutality, it's absolutely deliberate. It's a stark political statement. The message is the peace, the beauty, the prosperity of this garden, it depends on the king's ruthless victory over his enemies. The paradise is watered with the blood of his foes.
So much for the homesick queen story.
Exactly. That romantic legend, maybe appealing to the Greeks, it pales next to this raw political motivation. For a king like Sennacherib, this garden wasn't just pleasure or love, it was an active instrument of ideology. A monument to his wealth, his tech, his divine mandate, and his absolute terrifying power.
So what this really means is, this wasn't just a park. It was a carefully built statement of power. A giant living billboard screaming, "Look what I control! Look what I've achieved!" Breathtaking, yes, but also pretty chilling when you see the full picture. Outro. So we started this deep dive with this elusive phantom, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. A wonder wrapped in contradictions, almost too good to be true, a whisper from history we couldn't quite hear clearly. But going through these sources, we've really journeyed from that mystery to, well, remarkable clarity.
We really have. The weight of evidence now points overwhelmingly towards a magnificent, technologically advanced garden, but built not in Babylon, but by King Sennacherib at Nineveh. And this theory, it just resolves almost all those previous contradictions, the lack of evidence in Babylon, that weird anachronism with the water screw, it all clicks into place.
So the Hanging Gardens of Babylon weren't a myth after all. They were real, a world-changing achievement, just lost in translation, basically, and pinned onto the more famous rival city down south. Really makes you wonder, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And this isn't just about fixing a historical mistake, as important as that is. It's about understanding how stories get built, how power gets projected through these massive projects, and how even the most famous wonders can be completely misremembered, misplaced over time. It really begs the question, doesn't it? What other lost wonders are out there just waiting for us to find the right clues, accurately reclaim them, and restore them to their rightful, truly astonishing place in history?